Hello, today we're going to talk about the Cultural Artifacts Analysis. For RWRA 101, this is a museum project that will be completed in small groups. So what exactly is the Cultural Artifacts Analysis, or the CA project? Well, there's a few goals. One, we want to start asking questions about cultural values, about practices, particularly of things that maybe we use or are part of our everyday lives. We're practicing those questions and doing some research to find answers, to discover things that we can then communicate with others, particularly in a multimodal manner this time. You're learning about yourself in relation to others, to a culture, to participation in a particular group or community. This is a project where we are really practicing that inquiry, discovery, communication, our WRA 101 learning goals. We'll be doing this by our communication will be through a mini museum, which will provide a cultural overview. You'll have an exhibit for various objects with images and descriptions, and you'll have an annotated bibliography to share that research where you discovered some things about the questions that you were asking. We're going to go through each of these parts: inquiry, discovery, communication. So our inquiry. We might begin by saying, well, what do we mean by culture? What really is a culture? So for our purposes, you can think of culture as any group of people. It might be a community you belong to, your family. In our last project, we talk about how our profession or a discipline may be a culture. It might be your school, a language group, or even just a special interest group like a sports or hobby group that you belong to. When we're thinking about culture, we're thinking about the values, the things that are important to the people in that particular group, the things that bring them together, that maybe separate them from others. We're particularly, with this project, thinking about objects, those man-made things, those artifacts that belong or that help tie together that particular culture too. We'll begin some of our inquiry by setting up small groups based around similar interests, similar groups, communities, and you'll be identifying group roles and preparing a short proposal. So these groups will be of 2 to 4 students. You'll select a culture that you all have in common, and you'll work on identifying objects within that culture that each person is going to be exploring. You'll determine how you're going to communicate these discoveries, and you'll have a short conference with me as a whole group to kind of let me know where you're going with this project. Let me just show you what that document will look like. So each group will have a document like this where you'll identify your culture, what roles, who's going to perform those roles, what the actions are for the person in that role, what deadlines, what type of timeline is your group working towards, and there's a place for you to mark when you've completed it as well, just to kind of keep you on track. You'll think about and identify some questions. I'd say you probably want to have at least 3 to 4, maybe 5 questions for each object. And then you'll prepare a short written proposal, 300 to 500 words, where you briefly just kind of give us a little overview of the culture, what those objects are going to be and how they fit into that culture or why they're important to that culture, and what is your group's vision for this project. So how do you think you're going to get it all put together? What kind of tool are you using? Just kind of what is your plan for sharing, for communicating that information that you have? As I said, we'll be continuing our inquiry by asking those questions about our object, about our cultures. You'll be doing a KWHLAQ chart with your group. I'll show you that in just a moment as well. And you will be doing some research. So let me show you that chart and then talk about the research component. So I have one chart for each group, and it's one kind of big document that our whole class will share. So each group will select their group number and then fill this out for their group. You'll be listing what your culture is, put each person's name that is participating in that, what object that person will be kind of making that inquiry and discovery towards, and then answering these questions. Now, you've probably heard of a KWL chart. This goes just a little bit further. First, we still have our K. What do you already know about your object and or culture? We still have the W. What are some questions? What do you want to know about this? H, how are you going to find out about it? So this is a place for you to actually keep track of what websites you're finding, because others in your group might find those useful too. Articles, some of your research can go here. What are you learning? This is a spot to take a little bit of notes, because again, this is a group project and this is a space where your whole group can kind of see your ideas and gather it in one place for you. So what are you learning? Some of your preliminary notes. Action. How do you think you're going to take this learning, the things that you are finding out? How are you going to present that in your particular project? What are you going to do with it? And then questions. What questions do you still have? This is a great place, again, to communicate with your group, to say, hey, I'm having trouble finding something, or even, wow, this is something maybe that we need to explore too. And research. So this is not a project just to totally come from you, but think about the different types of research that we have done so far. So you can certainly use some general interest types of sources. You might find things online. You do want to make sure that they're credible, authoritative sources. So things that are really have some ethos and logos and that are kind of places we might be able to trust and believe in. But you also could draw on some primary sources. Perhaps you want to have a brief conversation with someone that you know that is in that culture or that community. And so you can do those interviewing as research as well. And then once we've done some of that inquiry, not that it ever really stops, but we do start to move into our communication piece. And our communication piece has 3 main areas. We're going to have that overview page that kind of explains the culture for everyone. You're going to have those objects with descriptions and images, and you're going to have that annotated bibliography of your sources. So let's talk about each of these pieces in a little more detail. Your overview page. So your overview page is really having you identify who belongs to this culture, what makes it a culture. When is or was this culture in existence, particularly if it's something in the past? Where is this culture located? Where might we find it? And then you want to identify why your group chose this culture. So what is your connection and your group members' connection? This overview page is probably going to be about 200 to 300 words. And you're going to have those objects with images and descriptions. If you've been to a museum before, they always have things that we can look at. Sometimes they're photographs, sometimes they're the actual object. For our purposes, they'll probably be images because we're not making a physical display, but some type of virtual display. So images, but then they also have a description of what we're seeing. Let's just take a look at an online museum exhibit. So this exhibit comes from the Smithsonian Institute, and they have several. We're just going to take a look at one here. So when we follow that link, it brings us to si.edu/exhibitions/online, the Smithsonian Online Exhibitions area. And we're just going to choose one here. So let's see. Let's take a look at Developing Stories, Native Photographers in the Field. In this exhibit, we have our overview page where it describes a little bit of what we're going to see in this particular exhibit. We can learn more about it, and we can also go straight to the exhibition. So here it is. We have a great big picture here, but if we scroll down, we have a little more of that overview, and then we have some various exhibits. These are your objects. Each object will have its own exhibit. These are done as a photo essay, and certainly you could have more than one image, a bit of a photo essay of your object as well. So this tells who we're going to be learning about, who the photojournalist is, and then a little bit more about them, and then we have the various photos that kind of tell this particular story. That, of course, is just one example of an online museum. And we'll talk about some various tools that your group might choose to put together your museum too. So as I said, research is going to be a component of this particular project. And you're going to present your research in an annotated bibliography. This is a genre that you will probably come across in other academic courses, and sometimes even in your professional life, you may need to create or read or refer to an annotated bibliography. Annotated bibliographies typically have a few components. They always have a citation. For our purposes, you can use MLA or APA. I would ask that your group be consistent, so you all need to use MLA or you all need to use APA. But your group can decide which is the citation style that you'd like to use for this project. And they are listed in alphabetical order, not the order that they are presented in. So as a group, you're going to be intermingling those and putting them in alphabetical order. An annotated bibliography has a brief summary. This can include quotes, but basically it's telling us what is the article or resource that you're using about, and what is the author's argument or main point. For our purposes, this is probably about 75 to 100 words of the whole annotation. An annotated bibliography, those annotations, that little brief piece of writing, often has a second component, and it's usually assignment specific. So for our specific assignment, we want to make those cultural connections. How does this source inform your museum exhibit or your cultural analysis of this object? So really, what does this source tell us about your culture or your object? What is it adding to the conversation? And how or why are you including this particular source? Those connections are probably about 100 to 200 words of your total annotation. Again, you need at least 3 authoritative sources. They're going to be 150 to 300 words each, and you can see an example of these in the written overview. Let me show you here. So I'm in the written overview for this assignment, and on the outline here, I can come down to the annotation example. This actually is an annotation that I wrote for a class assignment many years ago here, but looking at a particular book. So this is, and it's an MLA style, the source. This first paragraph provides the summary. Notice that there are some brief quotes to kind of add to that summary and really show, here's what this author is saying, here's who they're drawing on, this is what this book is about. And then the second paragraph makes those cultural connections. Once again, there are some quotes there. And then in the last sentence, I also bring out, here's how or what this source is doing for me in the project that I'm working on. Once your group has had a chance to work on all of those pieces, and it's quite a few to put together, you are going to publish and share that or communicate what you have done. As part of your proposal, and it can change throughout the project if you end up finding a different tool that works better, but you need to decide how you are going to publish or share your exhibit. Some possible tools: a Google slideshow, and you have a slide for each object and page, perhaps with multiple images on there. Canva, another place where you can put together presentations, and you can even create short videos in there as well. Perhaps you want to make a video of some sort with, particularly if you're exploring a particular place, you may want to actually take us on a little bit of a tour of that particular place. Or your group could also put together a website if you'd like to try that. If you have other ideas, please please ask or share them with me, and most likely the answer is yes. As always, an important piece of all of our projects is our reflection. These are individual, they are not group graded. So the project is a group project, but your reflection is your reflection. As always, it's 600 to 800 words or 4 to 6 minutes of an audio or video. And this time you also want to talk not just about the process of the project, like what you did and how you did it, but certainly talk about that collaborative writing experience. What was that like? What was your role? How did you do with your role? What happened with others in the group? So kind of take a moment to reflect on working in a group. Kind of our overall timeline is to start with those purpose pieces. Instead of doing individual learning goals, your group roles and proposals worksheet that you will do all together is your learning goals for this project. That's your 10 points of your purpose. Your process, the pre-writing, drafting, revising, publish, share, is done as a group. Your reflection, what did you learn? How do you know? Describe and analyze the group experience. That will again be an individual component. To help keep you on track, there is a cultural artifacts analysis checklist that I would recommend downloading or printing out and kind of keeping track once you get those things done. It is linked on the course website, www.writingwithdrp.com, and in Google Classroom. And our grading. As always, we have our 10 points for purpose. Once again, that's that group worksheet that goes over the roles and your proposal, and also kind of includes that group conference with me. Your process is 40 points, so going through the process, the peer review, doing those pre-writing activities, doing some revision, and putting it all together. And then your reflection is 50 points of the project, where you're really thinking about your learning and your process and what you are discovering about writing through this particular project. As always, if you have questions, feel free to email or schedule an appointment during office hours. And our credits to Slides Carnival for the lovely images.